In 1965, at a moment when Hollywood was quietly questioning whether the classic musical still had a place in a changing world, The Sound of Music arrived not as a nostalgic farewell, but as a reaffirmation of storytelling built on emotion, discipline, and human resilience. What many remember today as a warm, almost timeless family film was, in truth, a production filled with creative risks, unexpected tensions, and decisions that shaped its enduring power. One of the most surprising facts is that The Sound of Music was never considered a guaranteed success. Musicals were beginning to decline, and several high-profile productions had underperformed. 20th Century Fox itself was still recovering from financial instability. Betting heavily on a long, traditionally structured musical was seen by many as a gamble rooted more in hope than certainty. That risk makes the film's eventual cultural impact even more remarkable. Julie Andrews, whose presence now feels inseparable from the role of Maria, was not the studio's first instinct. At the time, Andrews was respected but not yet the universally adored figure she would become. Her casting was influenced not by box office assurance, but by her emotional clarity and vocal authenticity. What audiences heard was not a theatrical performance, but a voice that felt honest, disciplined, and deeply human. That sincerity remains one of the film's greatest strengths. A lesser-known detail is how physically demanding the role of Maria truly was. Andrews performed many of her own movements on the alpine locations, often in unstable conditions. Wind, uneven terrain, and unpredictable weather were constant challenges. The famous opening sequence, with Maria spinning joyfully on the mountainside, required repeated takes because the helicopter used for filming created powerful downdrafts that made it difficult for her to remain standing. The final image of serenity came at the cost of exhaustion and remarkable composure. The Austrian landscapes, now iconic, were not merely decorative. Director Robert Wise insisted on filming extensively on location to give the story a grounded reality. This decision was expensive and complicated, but it anchored the emotional journey of the characters. The mountains are not symbolic backdrops. They are silent witnesses to freedom, fear, and moral choice. Even today, those images retain a sense of scale that studio recreations rarely achieve. One of the most intriguing aspects of The Sound of Music is how carefully it balances innocence with gravity. Beneath the songs and family warmth lies a story shaped by historical tension. The rise of Nazism is not treated sensationally, but it is never trivialized. The film allows political pressure to seep gradually into domestic life, mirroring how real families experience historical upheaval, not as sudden catastrophe, but as a slow tightening of options. Christopher Plummer, who played Captain Von Trapp, famously had a complicated relationship with the film in its early years. Trained in classical theater, he initially struggled with the musical format and felt constrained by the role's emotional reserve. Yet this restraint became one of the character's defining qualities. The captain's transformation is subtle, measured, and believable precisely because it avoids grand gestures. His authority softens not through spectacle, but through quiet shifts in posture, tone, and attention. A fascinating fact is that many of the children's interactions were deliberately underplayed. Robert Wise discouraged exaggerated cuteness, favoring natural behavior over theatrical charm. The result is a group of young characters who feel like real individuals rather than decorative figures. Their discipline, humor, and gradual emotional opening reflect a household shaped by order and loss, not fantasy. The music itself carries narrative weight far beyond entertainment. Songs such as Do Re Mi function as educational tools within the story, but also as metaphors for rebuilding trust and communication. Music becomes a language that bridges authority and affection. This layered function of song is one of the reasons the film resonates so strongly with adult audiences who recognize learning and connection as lifelong processes. Another little-known detail is how meticulously the film was edited to preserve rhythm. With a running time that exceeded many studio expectations, pacing became crucial. wise, and experienced editor himself, structured the film so that musical sequences alternated with moments of stillness. This breathing pattern prevents emotional fatigue and allows the audience to absorb both joy and tension without feeling overwhelmed. The character of Maria is often remembered for her warmth, but her uncertainty is just as important. She is not immediately confident, nor is she presented as flawless. Her doubts about belonging, purpose, and discipline mirror questions faced by many adults navigating change. This vulnerability makes her growth feel earned rather than idealized. An especially revealing fact is how the film avoids portraying resistance as dramatic rebellion. Captain Von Trapp's refusal to cooperate with the regime is understated, rooted in personal values rather than heroic rhetoric. This choice gives the film moral credibility. Courage here is quiet, deliberate, and costly, an interpretation that speaks deeply to mature audiences who understand the weight of consequence. The Sound of Music also benefited from extraordinary technical discipline. Sound recording in open mountain environments was extremely challenging, requiring extensive post-production refinement. Much of the singing was carefully synchronized later, yet the performances retain a natural flow that disguises the technical complexity behind them. That invisibility of effort is a hallmark of classical craftsmanship. What continues to surprise modern viewers is how little the film relies on nostalgia. Its emotional power does not depend on memory alone, but on structure, clarity, and restraint. The story unfolds with patience, trusting the audience to follow gradual emotional shifts rather than demanding immediate reaction. At its core, The Sound of Music is not simply about joy or music, but about order rediscovered through compassion. It suggests that structure and freedom are not opposites, but complementary forces when guided by empathy. This balance, so carefully constructed, explains why the film continues to speak across generations. In revisiting the first movements of this story, it becomes clear that The Sound of Music achieved its longevity not by chasing trends, but by honoring timeless human experiences, loss, discipline, awakening, and choice. Its elegance lies not in spectacle, but in control of tone, of emotion, and of purpose. And perhaps that is why, nearly 6 decades later, its opening notes still feel less like an invitation to escape, and more like a reminder of something quietly enduring, that even in uncertain times, harmony can still be learned, one note at a time. As The Sound of Music moves beyond its luminous opening and settles into its central movement, the film begins to reveal a quieter, more complex emotional architecture. What initially feels like a story of personal liberation gradually becomes an exploration of responsibility, identity, and moral choice. The music remains present, but its function evolves. Songs no longer simply express joy, they begin to reflect internal change, hesitation, and resolve. One of the most revealing aspects of this middle section is how the household itself transforms. The Von Trapp home, once governed by whistles and rigid routines, slowly absorbs warmth without losing structure. This balance is essential. The film does not argue against discipline, it argues against emotional distance. Maria does not dismantle order, she humanizes it. That distinction is subtle, and it is one of the reasons the film resonates so strongly with mature audiences who understand that stability and affection must coexist. A lesser-known fact is that several scenes depicting daily family life were rewritten during rehearsals to sound less scripted. Robert Wise encouraged small pauses, overlapping dialogue, and restrained reactions. This approach gave the interactions an almost documentary quality. The children are not performing charm, they are responding. That realism allows the emotional changes within the household to feel gradual and credible rather than theatrical. The captain's internal struggle becomes more visible here, though it is never verbalized directly. His resistance to emotional closeness is rooted not in coldness, but in grief. The film respects that grief by not rushing its resolution. Widowerhood is not treated as a wound that can be healed by optimism alone. Instead, It is shown as a condition that shapes behavior long after the loss itself. This patience is rare and deeply respectful. One particularly telling detail is how music re-enters the captain's life. When he finally joins in song, the moment is not framed as a breakthrough, but as a surrender. The camera does not celebrate him, it observes him. His voice is not flawless, but it is sincere. That sincerity is what matters. The Sound of Music understands that emotional honesty often arrives imperfectly, and that imperfection is its proof. Another fascinating element is the treatment of romance between Maria and the captain. Their connection develops not through dramatic declarations, but through shared responsibility and mutual observation. They notice each other's values before acknowledging their feelings. This restraint lends the relationship a maturity that sets it apart from many cinematic romances. Love here is not impulsive, it is recognized. A detail often overlooked is how the film uses silence to underline this growing tension. As Maria becomes aware of her feelings, the music recedes. Scenes linger on glances, on moments left unfinished. The absence of song during these passages is intentional. It signals emotional confusion rather than resolution. The film allows discomfort to exist without immediately soothing it. The introduction of the Baroness brings another layer of complexity. She is not portrayed as a villain, nor as an obstacle to be defeated. She is composed, intelligent, and perceptive. Her awareness of Maria's presence is not jealous, but discerning. This choice avoids simplistic moral binaries and instead presents adult relationships as nuanced and often painful. The Baroness's dignity gives weight to the emotional consequences of choice. One intriguing fact is that the Baroness's role was deliberately underwritten in early drafts and later expanded to provide balance. The filmmakers wanted to avoid turning her into a caricature. Her composure highlights Maria's emotional authenticity without diminishing either woman. This decision adds a quiet sophistication to the narrative, acknowledging that not all losses are deserved and not all departures are failures. The Abbey scenes during this portion of the film reinforce the theme of self-examination. Maria's return is not depicted as punishment, but as retreat. The convent offers reflection, not refuge. The Reverend Mother's guidance is neither permissive nor authoritarian. She does not give Maria answers, she asks her questions. This pedagogical approach reflects a classical understanding of wisdom. Truth emerges through inquiry, not instruction. A lesser-known aspect of these scenes is how carefully they were staged to avoid sentimentality. The Abbey is calm, ordered, and emotionally neutral. It does not pull Maria away from life. It prepares her to return to it. This distinction is crucial. The Sound of Music does not frame withdrawal as virtue, but as preparation for engagement. As historical pressure begins to intrude more visibly, the film maintains its measured tone. The presence of the regime is suggested through symbols rather than spectacle. Flags, uniforms, and conversations appear at the edges of scenes, never dominating them. This restraint mirrors how political shifts often enter personal lives gradually, almost imperceptibly, until they can no longer be ignored. One striking detail is how the captain's values are revealed through small refusals rather than speeches. He does not argue ideology, he declines participation. These moments are brief but decisive. The film treats integrity not as something to be announced, but as something practiced quietly. For audiences who have lived through moral compromises and difficult choices, this portrayal feels authentic. The children's awareness of these changes is handled with similar subtlety. They sense tension without fully understanding it. Their questions are tentative, their reactions muted. This emotional realism avoids using children as narrative devices and instead honors their limited but perceptive understanding of adult conflict. Technically, the film's pacing during this section is meticulous. Emotional developments are allowed time, but never indulgence. Each scene serves a function, either advancing character or deepening atmosphere. This discipline reflects the influence of classical Hollywood storytelling, where structure is invisible but exacting. Another surprising fact is that several musical numbers were repositioned during editing to preserve emotional continuity rather than chronological logic. The filmmakers prioritized feeling over sequence. This decision demonstrates a confidence in narrative intuition that is increasingly rare. As this middle portion draws toward transition, the Sound of Music reveals its true ambition. It is no longer simply a musical or a family drama. It becomes a story about choosing how to live when comfort and conscience diverge. The joy remains, but it is now tempered by awareness. What makes this section so enduring is its refusal to simplify adulthood. Happiness is not presented as a constant state, but as something that must coexist with responsibility, loss, and restraint. The film trusts its audience to recognize this truth without explanation. In doing so, The Sound of Music earns its emotional authority. It does not charm by excess, but by precision. As The Sound of Music enters its final movement, the film subtly but decisively shifts its emotional center. What once unfolded as a personal story of belonging now confronts the weight of history. Yet the transition is never abrupt. True to its classical sensibility, the film allows tension to accumulate quietly, almost respectfully, trusting the audience to feel the gravity without being instructed how to react. One of the most striking choices in this final section is how music becomes more restrained. Songs no longer drive the narrative forward, they reflect what is at stake. Edelweiss, in particular, transforms from a simple patriotic melody into a deeply personal farewell. It is not a national anthem, but a confession of love for a homeland that is slipping away. Its power lies in understatement. The song does not shout defiance, it trembles with loss. For many viewers, especially those with lived historical memory, this moment resonates with a rare emotional honesty. A remarkable fact is that Edelweiss was written specifically for the film and not drawn from traditional Austrian music, as many assume. Its simplicity was intentional. The composers wanted a song that felt old, familiar, and fragile, as if it had always existed. That illusion of tradition speaks to the film's broader achievement, creating emotional truth through careful craftsmanship rather than historical literalism. The Salzburg Festival sequence marks the convergence of all narrative threads. Performance becomes risk, applause becomes cover, and art becomes survival. The film presents this moment not as spectacle, but as coordination and restraint. Every glance matters, every pause carries consequence. The tension does not arise from action, but from anticipation. This approach reflects the discipline of classic suspense, where control is more effective than excess. Captain Von Trapp's refusal to comply with the regime reaches its quiet culmination here. There is no dramatic confrontation, no raised voice. His resistance is composed, almost courteous. This portrayal is significant. The Sound of Music suggests that true moral strength often appears unremarkable on the surface. Integrity is shown as a series of calm decisions rather than a single heroic act. That message, delivered without emphasis, carries enduring weight. One often overlooked detail is how the camera frames authority figures during these scenes. They are rarely centered, rarely dominant. Instead, they appear at the edges of the frame, partially obscured, visually reinforcing the idea that power, while present, is not absolute. This subtle visual language aligns perfectly with the film's thematic restraint. Maria, in this final act, is no longer the catalyst of change but its anchor. Her role is not to inspire action, but to maintain steadiness. She does not lead through command or persuasion, but through emotional continuity. Her calm presence allows others to act decisively. This evolution of her character reflects a classical understanding of strength, not as dominance, but as reliability under pressure. The children's behavior during the escape is particularly telling. They are not panicked, nor unrealistically brave. They are attentive, quiet, observant. The film respects their awareness without burdening them with heroism. This balance avoids sentimentality and preserves emotional credibility. Childhood here is not innocence untouched by fear, but trust sustained through guidance. The escape itself avoids theatrical exaggeration. There is no chase filled with music and rapid cuts. Instead, there is silence, movement, and restraint. The film trusts stillness to generate tension. Each step through the convent grounds feels deliberate. The audience understands what is at risk without needing to be reminded. This confidence and implication is a hallmark of classical filmmaking. A particularly meaningful choice is the route taken by the family. Contrary to popular belief, they do not cross the mountains into Switzerland as legend suggests, but move toward Italy. While this detail is historically debated, its symbolic function is clear. The direction matters less than the act of leaving. The Sound of Music is not concerned with geography, but with resolve. The convent scene, where the nuns quietly assist by disabling vehicles, is another example of understated resistance. Their actions are practical, discreet, and effective. The film avoids turning them into symbols of rebellion. Instead, it presents cooperation as an extension of conscience. This portrayal reinforces the film's consistent message. Resistance need not be loud to be meaningful. From a technical perspective, the final act is notable for its disciplined pacing. Despite the emotional stakes, the film never rushes. Each moment is given space to breathe. This patience allows the weight of the decision to register fully. Modern audiences, accustomed to rapid resolution, may find this approach strikingly mature. The final ascent into the mountains is framed not as triumph, but as uncertainty. There is no promise of safety, only movement forward. The family walks together, but the future remains unseen. This refusal to guarantee a happy ending is one of the film's most courageous choices. It acknowledges that moral decisions often lead into ambiguity rather than reward. A subtle but powerful detail is the absence of a musical crescendo at the very end. The film does not end on a triumphant chorus, but on quiet determination. This restraint preserves the seriousness of what has occurred. The Sound of Music understands that some moments are too important to be celebrated loudly. Over time, this final section has become central to the film's legacy. What once appeared to some as overly sentimental is now recognized as carefully balanced storytelling. The film does not deny hardship, nor does it exploit it. It integrates joy and responsibility without allowing either to overshadow the other. For audiences who experience displacement, moral compromise, or historical upheaval, the film's conclusion carries particular resonance. It speaks not of victory, but of choosing how to live when circumstances narrow. That choice, framed without cynicism or illusion, gives the film its enduring dignity. The Sound of Music endures because it understands that harmony is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to move through it without losing oneself. Its final moments do not resolve history, but affirm humanity. They suggest that courage can be quiet, love can be disciplined, and hope can exist without guarantees. As the family disappears into the landscape, the film leaves behind not a lesson, but a feeling. A recognition that some stories remain with us not because they comfort us, but because they remind us who we hope to be when tested. And perhaps that is why, long after the final note fades, the Sound of Music continues to speak across generations. Not as a relic of another era, but as a reminder that grace, when paired with conviction, does not age. It simply waits to be heard again.